He's Howard Eibach, former copywriter and creative director, and the author of two books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 30 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Henry, we're back with another episode. Today we have Mark Pollard. He is the founder of a strategy training session that is hopping the globe. It's called Sweathead, and he's an author of books. He's a fascinating character, and this is part one of a two-part conversation. Let's join the conversation. Henry, we're back with another episode. Today we have the hard to track down, hard to pin down, but absolutely wonderful guest, Mark Pollard, who is coming to us from Colombia, not Colombia. Let's get that straight. Mark is a Renaissance man in strategy. You know, he's written books. He travels the world teaching strategy, strategic thinking. And he'll tell us more about that. I'm also curious to learn whether or not something I found out about you, Mark, is actually true, that you've won some awards as a musician, or is that a different Mark
That's a,
Pollard?
that's a different Mark Pollard. Yeah.
And we can make it up, you know.
Yeah.
All 17 of our viewers will,
I
none of
know.
them
Well,
will question. But in any event,
well,
before we dive into this conversation, let me say officially, on behalf of Henry and me, welcome to the Brief Brothers. We're really excited to have you.
thank you. It's a big topic. It's a specific topic, and the fact you've been able to talk about it for 5 years is incredible.
Well, we do a lot of reruns.
What's up with creative briefs these days?
Yeah, exactly. Everything touches on the brief, but it is definitely a sliver of the broader thing that is the essence of what you do and who you are and what you teach, which is strategy. So I want to start by asking, because you do so much traveling, literally globetrotting. You know, we had Ferris Jakob on a couple of years ago, and at that time, I, for one, thought that he and his wife were the definition of the vagabonds, but you make them pale because of how much travel you do. So if anyone in our industry has a finger on the pulse of what strategists are thinking about, are worrying about, you have to be in a pretty select group. So tell me, are strategists optimistic, pessimistic about our industry? What's going on? I mean, we see lots of smiling faces in the pictures that you send out on your emails and on Instagram, but give us a true sense of what's going on out there.
Well, I think they're also smiling more in the emerging markets where there's more enthusiasm. The populations are younger, they're growing at a crazy rate. There's opportunity. Strategy as a career and even advertising is more special compared to the way it can get taken for granted in other countries. So that's where some of those smiles come from. And maybe I've just made people laugh for 4 hours too, you know. Been told I'm surprisingly funny in some of these sessions, which I appreciate. I think the overarching narrative is one you'd be familiar with, which is people are preparing for their companies to replace them with AI. Obviously, we're in a phase right now where there's slow hiring and slow firing. In the US, September, I believe the jobs put on were about three-quarters less than last September. I believe there was about 7 months of job loss in the advertising industry this year, which is weird for me because I really feel it kicked off 3 years ago, just after Twitter made those big calls and fired a lot of people and everyone copied. But back then, let's say 3 to 4 years ago, what I understand from some research from the 4As is a lot of agencies hired younger people, 30s and 40s, which is old in this industry, started to lose jobs. They weren't being replaced. And now with AI, we're reading a lot of stuff about how younger people are not getting jobs. So graduates are really struggling. So there's probably about a 10-year career right now in advertising, and you can't even bet on that. A lot of people are trying to set up side businesses, side hustles. A lot of people are confused by that. Strategists are not very commercial. They think they are. They think that talk all this big game about trying to understand their clients' businesses really well, but they're not usually very commercial. They prefer to think rather than act. And that could take 5 to 10 years to change. And so I'd say overall, the narrative is not a positive narrative. People are keeping their heads down if they have senior positions, similar to what happened in 2000 and in other phases often the middle management in the 30s gets knocked out. Well, you could be upper management in your 30s in this industry as well. It's not necessarily getting replaced. So you start to see maybe one senior person in the strategy role, a bunch of people who are middle, not a lot in between, and then not a lot coming through. People won't be getting trained. People are not getting mentored because there's often a gap between the middle and the top, and that top person is managing the rest of the management team and pitching. So I think it's a mess. And then I also do hear positive stories. So on the one hand, there's that. Then I hear a few friends that I have are saying the past year or two have been some of their best years. But then also when I travel and I meet people in their 30s and 40s who've not had a job for a couple of years, they've said it's the hardest part of their careers. So I'd say it's largely negative, but there are people who are doing well.
Well, I think that's a great place. Usually you start by asking your background, and I just wanted to jump in and get your sense because you do travel so much. So let's just back up a bit and tell us, how did you find your way to advertising and strategy in particular?
A couple of things. So I was pretty lucky. I was making web. So I studied like 2 degrees, a combined degree in Sydney. I was 17. I was studying law and commerce, but I was making hip hop websites. So interviews with graffiti artists and underground rappers and putting on parties. So Asian dance parties is what we called them. Most of my friends in Sydney at that time had Asian background. That led to us getting extorted by the main heroin gang in the area. Well, I think in the world, maybe eventually. And so I stopped doing that and moved more into hip hop, started a magazine, wrote for lots of other magazines, 70 magazines around the world, was offered the main hip hop radio show in Sydney. So I did that from 20 to 25, published my magazine 20 to 28, and sort of offered little roles as largely doing like digital production. But back then that meant we did information architecture, user experience, account management, team management, everything, because there were no specialist strategy roles. When I was 28, I had a baby on the way and decided to freelance. I kept burning out. I just kept working too hard. I think in my 20s, I was a workaholic as a form of self-harm. I just kept trying to work myself into the ground, literally. And then when I was 28, I thought I can't keep doing this. So the job market was good. Decided to freelance as a producer and said I'd only take a full-time role if it involved strategy. There were not a lot of strategy roles in Sydney at the time. I mean, they could not have been more than 40 or 50, but Sydney is a really strong market. And I was offered a couple of roles, but I took a role at Leo Burnett, which was definitely my peak agency experience. And I had 50% of my time allocated to digital work and 50% of my time allocated to account planning. And that's really the start of all the stuff that I've done ever since.
So what was it that helped launch Sweathead and the work that you do now that takes you all around the world? Was it just Sweathead, or was there something in between, or was it an evolution?
Yeah, I'll try to do the story as quickly as possible. So I moved to New York 14 years ago from Sydney. I had 5 years of culture shock in corporate America. Everyone tells us that they hire Australians because we're cheeky, we're direct, we do weird work. Obviously, people like David Droger and many of the other strategists have set a really good reputation for us. People tend to like us. And then you arrive and you realize you were lied to repeatedly. And you realize after a little bit of time that maybe you're a bit stupid and you either just need to suck it up and deal with corporate America or you need to do something else. After 5 years, I was like, I really like the idea of account planning or strategy. When I've taught it while working, it always centers me. And I'm like, oh, I love this stuff. And then I have to go back to dealing with politics and people who don't get it, including creative teams, including presidents that I reported to in 800-person companies, having to defend my role all the time, even though they hired me. And so I thought, you know what? This is about 8 or 9 years. So let's say 9 years ago. I thought I really do like what I do. I just need to find a different way to do it. So I set up a company called Mighty Jungle in New York. For 2 years, my goal was to break even on living in New York. And I had 2 kids, not in private school, but my break even was substantially into the 6 figures of US, like 6 figures US. And so I managed to do that. And then just had a few moments. Well, one of them was I got interviewed on someone's podcast in London when I was over there. This is super early days, relatively speaking, of podcasts in our field. And I was like, hang on, I did radio for 5 years. I used to write magazines. I used to like edit books and all kinds of things. And so I would say since I started Sweathead, it's just been me reconnecting with the stuff that I would disappear into until 3 a.m. in my teens and in my 20s. Literally started an online community, started a podcast instead of a radio show, published a book instead of a magazine, put on events, and then increasingly the events became about me, which is not what I wanted it to be when I started. So they're sort of some of the things that happened. Obviously, crisis and financial pressure, especially in New York, is useful sometimes. I do feel I have PTSD from all of that. But for example, I wrote this book, Strategies with Words, 2018, started to get it ready for a Kickstarter campaign in 2019, raised $40,000, which was amazing on Kickstarter, which was enough to get it printed and to pay for some design and editing. That's not a lot of money in the US, and people outside of the US don't understand that. And then in the pandemic, before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of events with my friend Julian Cole. The pandemic came, he left New York, we had to cancel our events. And then on May 4, 2020, May the 4th be with you, I decided to turn my book, which was still getting slowly printed because of all the delays with paper and shipping and tariffs and all this sort of stuff. I turned my book into a 100-day course, and I made one class every single day because I'm an idiot. And that sort of kicked off a whole other revenue stream. And because I was resisting going online, I just resisting so much stuff. I often get a lot of mental blocks, but that's a very fast telling of all the things, a lot of the things that had to happen to bring me to a few years ago, not to today, but a few years ago.
Well, I sympathize. I mean, I've had during the pandemic, I teach, workshops on the creative brief, and I was forced to do it online. It's no fun. But when the option is that or you don't do it, say, okay, we'll make it work. But
Yeah.
from personal experience that when you can look in the eye of the person 10 feet away from you, you get a different reaction than when you're looking at them on screen.
Yeah, there's a bit of research about this as well. Look, it's a privilege, for us to have been locked inside largely and to still been able to feed a family, which a lot of people would have struggled to do. So I don't take it for granted, but also after 5 years of teaching online, which I still do a bit of, like, I feel like I'm a crazy man in the deep end of a pool shouting into a wall sometimes. And so being in person with people, it's so beautiful, especially in countries who are really appreciative of you. I've started to cry this year, or awkwardly, briefly, and in a really tough way. But I've started to cry at some of my events just because I just feel the love, and I realize that teaching is like my love language. But yeah, I think the only thing that I'd quickly add is like 2 years ago, I did about 10 events overseas, like Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Georgia in Europe, which I love, Turkey, and a few other places. And just to sort of finish how I ended up here today, like right now, I started to see photos of myself happy. And that is not something I've associated with myself growing up. Like, I don't like looking at photos of myself as a teenager in my 20s or 30s. I was a bit depressed. I was often depressed, a lot of fight or flight. Grew up a little bit in the inner city, had a very good education, but a little violence aware, and started seeing photos of myself happy in these other countries. And I'm like, okay, what is going on there? And so last year, I decided to do more events overseas, including to countries that I'd never been to before. We have a little bit of data through who listens to the podcast, social media, etc. And I'm usually aiming for, say, 30 to 40 people. I wanted to go back to Australia to see my dad for his 90th birthday. And in some cities like Jakarta and Manila, we had 200 to 300 people turn up. And I was like, what the hell's this? So then this year I've done at least 30 cities, and I'm literally today and yesterday coming out of planning sessions where I'm looking at the list of cities I think I'll do for the next year and a half, and I'm already exhausted. I'm like, oh my God, because I got COVID twice. Sometimes I come home and I'm in bed for 2 weeks having COVID, or maybe a little bit of depression, or sprained an ankle first day in Puerto Rico on one tour. That's what I call them, tours. Got robbed in Colombia. Can't use my thumb still. Like, there's real risk with this sort of stuff, let alone being jet lagged for 2 to 3 months of the year, let alone sometimes arriving in like Tashkent in Uzbekistan, closing the door, falling asleep, waking up going, oh, I just missed my plane. And I literally just arrived. So there's like, it is amazing and I love it. And also it's high risk.
Well, you give a different picture than I imagined, which was one of the
Yeah.
reasons, we wanted to have you on. It's, you're a hard man to pin down, but, good things are worth waiting for. So we appreciate you carving out some time for us.
Those-
What's what's your favorite part? Are you beside the teaching? And I get the teaching part. It's just there's an adrenaline rush. And Henry's done a lot of teaching too. He knows.
Yeah.
Aside from the teaching, what would you say is the most rewarding part of what it is that you do?
Well, also the teaching for me is not just the adrenaline rush. And I literally have started to say this at the end of my sessions where like I had to, when you're young, you think you have to travel to like work things out, but you're too young. Like you need a lot of crisis, maybe in the one place and then travel. But for me, I had to travel in the past few years to meet the person I think I am, and I'm most me on stage. In
Mm.
other parts of my life, I turn off. I feel a bit of PTSD in certain situations. When groups are big, my brain just closes down. I can become avoidant. On stage, I'm making jokes. I'm in people's heads. I'm teaching them stuff that you often will change their careers and hopefully lives. So the teaching for me is not just about like giving back. Everything I've done, I've taught. I did martial arts. I taught martial arts, hip hop. I started to teach the music industry. It's just, I think you're just born a teacher. My mum taught a little bit too, so it's probably in the genes, or at least in the environment. And then every now and then, someone will say, with my book, for example, it's the first time I've seen myself in a book. So they're the moments that I do this for. I do like having a business. I like being commercial. I like making products. It's hard right now with what's happening in the world, especially with what's happening in the US. But it's the sort of exchange of souls or of soul that I like through what I do. And strategy is just a vehicle to do that.
I'm curious if someone offered you a very high paying job to go back to corporate world to, being a strategist, would you say yes or no?
I'm more powerful outside of institutions
Mm, yeah. Yeah,
because
that's
once they own you, they try to own you. And I'm not an employee. I set up magazines and businesses when I was 20. I sort of went to be an employee because I got married young. We got a mortgage, we had kids, and I think that's what I have to do. I had a very limited idea of what is possible in life, let alone in relationships. I didn't, my parents split when I was young. I just sort of got married young because my dad was old when he had me, and then they got divorced. So I just did the opposite. That was my math. Like I had no depth of understanding of these topics. And now I travel and I meet so many people who are usually younger and just teach me about how there's different ways to be in the world, different kinds of relationships you can have, different relationships with business that you can have. And that's the gift that I get back when I travel.
who
So
would you go ahead, Henry.
I
Well, I
was
was going to say, I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
so if somebody comes to see you in Colombia, it's Colombia, by the way.
Colombia.
Colombia, yes.
Colombia.
Gracias.
Um,
Que
if somebody comes to see you, what can they expect? Like, what are they in for? What is or does it depend? Do you have different presentations for different
No,
audience?
I have one set of material. I don't update it too often, and it typically goes into linear and lateral thinking, the power of problems, how to write insights, what they are, what they're not. Think linear and lateral thinking, including ideas, borrowing heavily from the work of Edward Bono, how to write strategy, talk about writing and words, research into a lot of that. Marketing Sciences 101. It's super practical. It can be pretty funny. I mean, this year people have said at the end, wow, that was surprisingly funny. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I get people to cry, but basically everything I teach, I'll introduce a concept, I might show an example, and then we do practical applications. So we do deliberate practice. I do have a theory that I try to bring to life with all the teaching, like a theory of pedagogy. But largely it's pretty practical. And a lot of that's just because I used to go to some conferences, not a lot, because everywhere I worked, you'd never go to a conference unless you were talking. But I just got sick of them. They're all corporate messages being spoken at. I was like, no, I want to do the opposite. I want to have, often I would bring people on stage in the past, or I'd break things down into very practical ways. And then what I do also love is this thing called constructivism, where you construct a lot of the interaction around the audience, just like a comedian with roasting. So I'll have my bits and my sections, and then if we're digging into a problem, for example, I'll bring someone up and I'll go, well, before they get up, I'll go, is anyone dealing with some difficulties in life that they'd like to share with the 200 of us? And then I'll bring someone up on stage, and sometimes it gets super personal, and that is always really, really interesting. I mean, a guy in Amsterdam in his 50s said he struggles to commit to relationships because he's comparing every woman to his mum, right? So this is what we're talking about. And those are the moments where the energy in the room shifts. And they're the moments that I hunt for. I don't do formal education.
How long,
How,
how many hours or how long are the typical?
4 hours mostly, but I can do 8 hours to 2 days. I can do 2 hours. I like the 3 to 4 hours that I usually do in the public
yeah.
events. I've got other content on presentations and writing on public voice, finding your voice in public, etc. But it always feels like I'm adding something that doesn't need to be there, even though I do teach some of that stuff. But the 4 hour session is pretty well built, and it's also built in a way that if I were working with clients, it's sort of what I would do in a half-day workshop as well.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.
Bye-bye.